The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, so we can officially start. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with a great pleasure that I'm here today to open this webinar on the topic of CFO, leading through change, business transformation, and performance optimization. On behalf of LEORON Professional Development Institute and the Financial Academy, let me warmly welcome you all here at the webinar. My name is Ivana, and I will be the event manager for this webinar. I'll stay in the background to technically support you with anything you may need. On the other side, we have Marc Cannizzo, with more than 30 years of experience in the banks and general business experience in designing, delivering training courses to corporate clients covering a variety of sectors. He worked for 10 years at Citibank in Switzerland in various capacities: credit analyst, corporate relationship manager, and risk in private banking. More on his experience, it will be a chance for you to hear on this webinar. This session will take for an hour. So as Marc just mentioned, it will be 40 minutes of the presentation. And at the end, you will have about 20 minutes of a Q&A session. I will strongly recommend that you all take part in the Q&A session by unmuting yourself and ask your question. Also, the platform itself allows us to press the button question mark or raise hand. That will also give us a sign that you are awaiting for your question. Hope you will enjoy the session. And Marc, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. Appreciate that. And you make me feel old when you make a reference to 30 years in working, training, business, and so on. But I must say, this is my first pandemic, okay? And I think probably the first pandemic for most people around. Of course, it's almost necessary to have to mention the pandemic, because if we're talking about leading a business through change, think about what the biggest changes have been in the last 18 months, and therefore what kind of challenges we're presented with in terms of transforming our businesses and also optimizing the performance, which are nice kind of MBA sounding words. But I want to just focus in on a few key issues that I think emerge at this point in time, because when we did this round of webinars about a year ago, we were just at the beginning of the pandemic. And at that time, it was unclear where we were going. So people asked me to make a presentation about, business financial management in a time of pandemic. And again, as that was my first pandemic, how am I going to address this issue in a way which is helpful to other people? Because I don't have the experience about what to do in a pandemic. So we were all, feeling our way forward with things that were uncertain. Think about it a year ago, what we didn't know about how extensive the characteristics of this virus, what the right measures would be at the government level and the health policies and so on. And at that time, we spoke about short-term measures to preserve the business, because when people were in lockdown and had to stay at home and so on, and demand was dropping, it was all a question of cash conservation. And I went through a number of issues with regard to cash management and the sorts of things that people have to do when you're kind of in a short-term survival mode in order to be able to handle the challenges that were facing us 1 year ago. Now, let's just think about what's happened since then. We have a vaccine, and the vaccine rollouts have been good and maybe not so good in some countries. Some countries like India are still experiencing, Brazil are still experiencing a surge of the epidemic because of the variants, or what do they call them? The variants, the mutants, that seem to be more infectious. So it's still a rather mixed situation. I am in Zurich, Switzerland today. Yesterday, the restaurants opened for the first time in a year. So you see, now things are starting to move in some places towards a better situation. And people are kind of catching their breath now and easing up and feeling more relaxed. Psychologically, to get the vaccine does make you feel personally that you're not so vulnerable. So now people can kind of start to look into the future and say, okay, how do we get back to kind of a new normal? And that's basically what I wanted to touch on today. Just some of those ideas that I wanted to share with you. And when Ivana says, inviting your questions, I'm also as much as inviting your comments, your observations, and maybe things that you have noticed or have experienced which are helpful to the group. Okay, so that's where I wanted to go. So the overview today, just wanted to touch on things, the main question being what's changed, what hasn't changed, what has changed permanently, what changed during the pandemic but is going to go back to what it was before. And just to have a few issues, I made a checklist here of things that I thought were worth talking about. Online commerce, of course, technology always with us, whether we have a pandemic or not. Working arrangements, that's practical sort of day-to-day story. Corporate culture, I want to focus in on the issues of corporate culture that I think I've thought about during the year and you've experienced, of course, during the year. A little bit about management accounting, financial innovation, and then socio-cultural changes. We'll end up on a big picture situation. But let's start at the obvious, most practical end of things, okay? So first, ideas. Clearly, with regard to online commerce, we know that people made a lot of money being able to move onto e-commerce, and that's where things really took off. So as they say in this particular, I just took this article, it was about luxury goods, and I took it more or less at random, saying that the e-commerce evolution, we should almost call that a revolution, has arrived. In other words, more and more people are moving online into online commerce. I think what we can say is that there's no surprise here, of course. First of all, these are the trends that were obvious to us already before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic has accelerated the movement onto in the direction of e-commerce. So we've actually fast forwarded into the future in a way which I think we're not going to be reversing and going back from, so that when people are used to ordering things online, I think many things will continue to stay online, and therefore that's a new reality. That's the new normal which has come into play now. Another simple example, of course, would be mobile payments, contactless card payments. I didn't use that in the past very much. I had perhaps too much cash in my pocket, but simply the way supermarkets were organized and so on, I think pretty much everybody prefers, or most people prefer to pay by card, and therefore that is becoming almost the rule now. And I think when people get used to that, they don't go back. You have to remember, of course, that you have people who are innovators and they love new technology, so they'll be the first ones using it. There are other people like me who are much more reticent to move to new things, because I'm not necessarily attracted to new fads. But I will do it if other people kind of insist that I do it in order to move with the time. Sometimes we have to be practical, and that's why debit cards and so on are necessary. In fact, very funnily enough, when I got back to Zurich for the first time after 16 months, I had a dumb phone at my sister's place, which I use for local telephone calls. And so I switched it on, I logged in and so on, and then I found I couldn't make any telephone calls. I don't know why it was blocked. I had 20 Swiss francs of credit on this phone. It was a prepaid card. So I brought it to the shop and I said to them, what's wrong with the phone? And the guy looked at it and he laughed and he said, this is a 2G phone. Can you imagine? Do you know anybody with a 2G phone? So I'm probably the only 2G participant in the country, which means I can only talk to myself pretty much on that telephone. So I changed the telephone. Okay, so sometimes we're pulled forward into updating things, and that's simply life. But if we take this e-commerce story to a broader level now, clearly what companies are doing is that they are rethinking their digital strategies. They've been doing that before the pandemic, but the pandemic has probably forced them to think very hard about these things that they maybe postponed in the past. I learned that, for example, luxury goods have had difficulty moving on to online sales, because they have very fancy shops and they have people who like to see the clothes and feel the clothes and things like that. Buying online would probably be associated with more economic items. I think this is really assumptions we're making about consumer behavior, but you perhaps are aware that Brooks Brothers, for example, which is the quality suit maker, and you can buy very nice shirts, dress shirts from them. Brooks Brothers declared bankruptcy last year, and they were bought up by other investors. So the brand name still exists, but the luxury market has had a difficult time with regard to the pandemic, and therefore they have to think about how they're going to adapt their sales channels. And of course, the artificial intelligence, the huge leaps forward which artificial intelligence and the processing of big data is now allowing people to be able to start to analyze user experience and to assess a user experience online. Now, these things are not only marketing issues. I know that they are, digital strategies are, and sales channels are very much connected to marketing strategies. But of course, the CFO has to be aware of these things, clearly, because the CFO, because he or she is handling the finances of the company, has to be intrinsically integrative and to think about what all the different activities in the company are, how much they require in terms of investment, and what kind of return they are bringing to the company. From a strategic point of view, do they make sense? What sort of activities should we get involved in? So the CFO has a huge job in order to be up to date and understand from the other, from their peers, what's happening both on the technology side with marketing issues, production issues, et cetera, logistics and so on. So this is really the challenge we have in terms of evaluating investments, assessing performance, and of course, I mentioned the Brooks Brothers story specifically because the pandemic will have driven a lot of companies to the wall, meaning into financial difficulty. It will also have driven a number of companies over the edge, especially, unfortunately, small and medium enterprises, maybe family-owned businesses, small businesses have found it perhaps very difficult to be able to survive the pandemic. Now, for those of you who are in a stronger sort of market positions, of course, this gives you the opportunity then to look at the mergers and acquisitions market and to see if there are not competitors that you can pick up for reasonable amount of money. So in other words, because of this pandemic, some companies have failed, but other companies are going to come out stronger because they're able to move on the M&A side or to expand their businesses organically in other ways because they have the resources and they have the way forward. So this shows the importance of strategic thinking, not only looking at the immediate opportunities, but to think long-term about what kind of business you have. So we could talk for a whole hour just on this slide because e-commerce is really quite absorbing stuff. And if I broaden it to the digital story, then of course there's a lot of things that we could talk about in terms of business transformation. But what I'd like to do is I want to make sure that we cover a number of points in the short time that we have here, just to so that we can open up the floor to any comments. Now, connected to the e-commerce, of course, would be the technology itself, technology, automation. And here, the way I like to think about this thing is, do we come across, are you pursuing your technological innovations as part of a strategic planning process that you have in place? Or are you seizing opportunities? In other words, grabbing in an opportunistic way things that as they come along and you say, oh, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought about that. Let's do it. I'm still waiting for drones to come and drop pizzas into my garden. For me, that's the kind of future that I can embrace and I can buy into. I'm very happy about that. So technology obviously is a huge area as well, and no doubt those of you who are in more technologically driven businesses, you are already switched on into thinking about how one can leverage technological capabilities to improve your effectiveness and competitiveness as a business. Of course, your competitors are doing the same thing, so you're presumably in a very competitive playing field with regard to making these sorts of choices. And of course, it isn't easy. It wasn't easy before, and it isn't easy now. Now, I'd like to kind of move beyond the technology story to, I want to touch on strategy and so on. But I think there's another important aspect that we have to talk about, and that's why I put this quotation down here from the business guru Peter Drucker. Now, Peter Drucker, he said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What does he mean by that? Well, what he says that what he means by that basically is you could have a great strategic planning process. In other words, all the brain power thinking about different business strategies that you could embark upon. But the strategy is just the brain work. The actual doing, the hands-on and the implementation and so on, a lot of that is got to do with the culture of the company, how flexible the company is, and how people are able to acquire and embrace new ideas and to be able to act upon them. In other words, the culture idea is talking, for example, what degree of entrepreneurial thinking do you have in your business? A strategic planning process cannot replace the entrepreneurial instincts that you like to preserve. Even in a large publicly quoted company, strategy does not take the place of people having an entrepreneurial approach, almost like a small business approach to developing their companies. So in this sense, I want to turn the conversation a little bit towards culture. We can come back to strategy later on, but this is why culture is important. And I'm going to, I should have named this presentation the Jamie Dimon presentation. Jamie Dimon is the CEO and general manager of JP Morgan Chase, obviously a major American bank you've all heard of. And of course, the bankers being a very, Jamie Dimon is like one of the most visible bankers on the, not only in the American, but on the international banking scene. And therefore, I have a number of quotations from him in this presentation. You're going to be kind of tired hearing from him, but I just thought that they were probably interesting for you. I have a banking background. I worked for Citibank, as Ivana mentioned. So I thought it might be better to take a competitor bank and quote from him. So here we are. Working arrangements. I'd just like to spend a couple of minutes here to talk about working arrangements, because again, this comes back to the most personalized experience that all of you I know have had. When the day came that people had to stay at home, when there was the lockdowns and therefore you couldn't go to the offices, even if you wanted to go to your office, and therefore your working arrangement was at home. And at that time, a year ago, we were saying, okay, yeah, some people were happy to stay at home because they could take care of their kids at the same time that they worked online. It gave them more flexibility and things like this. And so everybody was kind of excited about this a year ago. And a number of business offices stood empty for a long time as we worked our way through the pandemic. Now, more recently, this is the latest quote unquote thinking, if you will. And think about it. People get fed up with maybe staying at home. So Jamie Dimon, okay, so this is CEO of JP Morgan Chase, said, fed up with Zoom calls and remote work. And he says, commuting to offices, people want to go back to work, okay? They want to go back to work. Now, I'm not going to slow down my presentation right now by doing a, actually, I opened up the chat box. If you'd like to answer in the chat box, are you happy to go back to work, or are you happy staying at home? We should maybe, if Ivana could supervise a kind of informal survey among the participants who are listening to me right now. if you could just register on the chat box in some way, yes or no, are you happy to stay at home or are you happy to go back to the office? Just write home on the chat line or write office on the chat line. It would be interesting for us to know what your preferences are at this point. So what Jamie Dimon is saying is he wants actually people to come back to the office. And of course, with the vaccines, that's going to be possible now. So that's probably a good thing. Now, why does he say this? Let's go further. Let's drill deeper in this story about working arrangements. This is what Jamie Dimon says, and he's making a specific reference to corporate culture. He's saying that working from home, well, he's talking about young people don't like it, first of all. Well, you know, he's an old guy. I'm not so young myself. What do young people think? I'm sure we need to have surveys to know. Do people want to go back to the office? He says it doesn't work for those who want to hustle. What does hustle mean? That's a very American kind of term. The people who like to kind of network with other people. They like to, you know, like in a cocktail party, the guy likes to meet people and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, and get into conversations and who are you and so on. And the problem is on Zoom calls, and you probably are tired of Zoom calls as well, it's not spontaneous, right? It's not spontaneous. And that's the problem, right? You listen to somebody like me now. If you get bored, you open the fridge, you turn on the TV maybe or something else. You kind of wander away possibly. But you can't sort of talk to your colleague and say, boy, that guy is boring, you know, or roll your eyes and somehow have a informal chat with one of your colleagues. Well, you probably could through some kind of, you know, WhatsApp line or something like that. You can talk to other people offline. But what he's saying is it doesn't work for culture. In other words, what he's saying is that the informal ideas generation is impeded when we work from home, okay? So if professional and administrative workers were happy to stay at home at the beginning, of course, drivers and people handling merchandise and store workers, they still had to go to work, okay? So we're talking about those people, you know, who were, you know, banks and architects and consultants and so on. These are people who stayed at home because of the lockdowns. Now, would they choose to want to go back to work? I would say yes. I think what we're going to see is a hybrid solution. We're going to see a rotation situation because I think it is important. I asked myself right at the beginning a year ago, what's happening to corporate culture if you don't go to the office? How do you get to know your colleagues over Zoom? I was on one Zoom call a few months ago, and there was a guy who was hired last year, shortly after the lockdowns began. He got a new job at a new company, and he never met his colleagues. So how to understand how the company works? A very simple definition of corporate culture would be how things work around here. But the question is, in a virtual context, what does here mean? How do you define and influence your corporate culture? This is the problem that Jamie Dimon is confronted with, and I think it's a very serious issue that concerns corporate managers, and you should be thinking about this yourself. How do you influence your corporate culture if you don't have people who are immediately sort of in the office able to be have informal lines of communication? Now, of course, we know that working at home has some financial benefits. When I talk about the hybrid solution, for example, when I went to pay my insurance premiums recently for the car and the house, I learned from my insurance salesman, and the funny thing is I was taking a walk in the city and I dropped by the office there. They had to open the door. They said, well, you know, we only allow visits from customers by appointment. I called ahead and said, I'd like to drop by because I like to have direct contact with people. I had my mask and, you know, everything was safe. And they told me, this is a major international insurance company. They said to me that they were moving offices and that they were going to lease half of the surface area they currently have. In other words, they're moving to a hybrid solution. They want to continue having working offices with people coming to the office and interacting, but not on the same full-time and full-scale basis as before. So those people who like part-time working, they can stay home maybe for 3 days a week or 4 days and come into the office 1 day a week. And so on a rotation situation, you get people coming together from different departments, sharing ideas and so on. Now, why is that important? Even though I teach finance courses, I really do believe that corporate culture is extremely important. It's because if we break down and analyze a Zoom call, you know, a business school professor of mine, I had lunch with him today. He said basically Zoom meetings are basically transactional where information is exchanged, okay? So I'm giving you hard facts, you're giving me hard facts. Did you make the numbers last month? What were the sales, blah, blah, blah. I can even send that in writing to you to read. You don't even need to have a Zoom call for that sort of thing. But think of the limitations. There's no informal communication or very little of it on a Zoom call because, you know, people time the meeting times and they want to, you know, they want to get off the Zoom call as quickly as possible. There's no spontaneity. And for me, this is the most painful thing. There's no on-the-job training. Think about how important on-the-job training was for you when you started in your first jobs. You sat at a desk, you met people directly, you asked them, how do you do this? What do you do? They taught you, they told you things. You're not going to make a Zoom call to ask them spontaneous questions about what they do in their job, right? On the learning in a great degree. You have only your job description, you have your goals or your objectives that you have to meet, and that's basically what you're focused on. And it eliminates a lot of the, you know, what we call in American business culture, the water cooler kind of interactions. In Europe or in the Middle East, I guess we could call it, you know, the kind of conversations that take place around the coffee machine. When people take a break and they come across somebody who's in a different department that they don't see during the day, don't really have a formal reason to talk to them. But when you're sitting next to somebody at the cafeteria, for example, and you get into a discussion, then some ideas start to move. It's like a brainstorming. It's a wonderful thing. And some companies really rely on this. And I bet you very much that some companies have suffered because of the pandemic and because of the lockdowns. So that's why I think this is a big deal, and it's very important for us to think about corporate culture. And now we understand from Jamie Dimon's point of view why it is important why he wants to get people back into the office. He can't just shut down the office altogether and say, you know, don't come to the office anymore, because what does it mean to be an employee? How do you identify with your company? The 10 years I spent with Citibank, for example, in a sense, you were, you know, you got out of bed and you were looking forward to going to work because you liked your colleagues. It was kind of a socializing possibility, but also, you know, in terms of the content of the work and the way, you know, I felt like every day was a learning experience because there was a buzz in the air. Have you ever had a buzz in the air in a Zoom call? Probably not. If you go up to the treasury, for example, in a bank, and you see the guys, you know, dealing there and so on, it's a very exciting environment. And you learn from the guys if they take the time to tell you what's happening in the treasury trading area. And that spillover in terms of on-the-job training is really an important thing. So, you know, as trainers, of course, we understand, you know, the concerns that we have at LEORON. I share with this very sincerely with you, is that while we make a great effort to provide online training, which we've been doing for the past year, we are extremely looking forward to getting back into classroom as well, because I feel that the seminar type of situations where you do case studies together and discuss them together is also a great way of recreating as much as possible the working environment. And therefore, you know, training in the classroom, I still believe, is probably much more effective than, you know, Zoom calls, training by Zoom calls. And I had this validated by my business school professor friend today I had lunch with. He had his first group last week where he physically stood in a classroom. And he said it was a wonderful experience to be back there and to be, you know, sort of in touch with, in contact with people. So that's something that you need to think about in terms of working organization. Sure, you have people who'd like to stay on a part-time or at home work. That's fine. I think it depends on the kind of job description that they have. Okay, so that's where I've spent a lot of time talking about corporate culture, even though we're finance specialists. That may surprise you, but it's something that we have to face up to in terms of how do we run our businesses, and how do we make it, how do we generate new ideas and get people to work together in a collaborative way. It's very much a people organizational story as well. If you're a charming person or you have a lot of charisma, for example, have you ever felt that that's being limited or somehow neutralized by Zoom calls? Maybe your jokes aren't as funny. I don't know. Anyway, I'm looking forward to situations where spontaneity can be reintroduced into business interactions, where we have chance meetings, brainstormings, where innovation is going to be more optimized. And I think that's why going back to work is actually probably a good thing. Okay, let's move ahead. I've still got some other issues that I need to touch on. And the next item of business that I had in mind was management accounting. Yes, of course, there was if you notice, there was a issue on management accounting. Now, this kind of follows on from the cultural aspect a little bit, and it's got to do with how we have defined our management accounting programs, because over time the management accounting began as kind of a cost accounting a job inside businesses. It was to of production work, to be able to put together cost of sales and therefore be able to put together the financial statements for the business. And what's been a case for many years, has nothing to do with the pandemic, is that the management accounting role has become much more important. It's had a gradual upgrading in terms of importance to that of a strategic function, which is why the CFO is also as much a super management accountant in terms of supervising those activities that allow management accounting to be most effective in a business. Now, management accounting is only really effective if you have somebody who's out there and knows how the business is organized. In other words, somebody who walks around the production plant and talks to the production people, logistics people, talks to marketing people and so on, and understands what's going on in the company. He cannot be only a consumer of reports on costs coming to his office. So this is the connection with the pandemic, that the importance of being proximate to the physical activities. Social distancing, home working actually work against exactly this trend of where we want management accountants to be close to the actual, where the action is taking place. So I hope, again, now because of the vaccine hybrid situations coming to sort of a new normal, that business managers will make sure that they get the most out of their management accounting functions by making sure that management accountants are close to the action, talking to across the business organizations, people directly interviewing them, understanding how things are organized, how things could work better, understanding activity-based costing and all those sorts of things we talk about in our programs, so that at the end of the day they can design key performance indicators and make them as effective as possible. Because we know that even before the pandemic, to have good KPIs was always a search for relevance. In other words, to measure the right things. That's always going to be the challenge in management, in general management and financial management, is to make sure that your KPIs are always up to date and relevant. Okay, if your KPIs are very old and your business model has changed, probably you're measuring the wrong things. And that's why it's very important to be able to review and to redesign your KPIs to be sure that you are measuring the right things. And we devote entire programs to this very question. And this is why I'm inviting you to just keep in mind that you are putting your management accountants to the best possible work. In other words, your administrative overheads, which are pretty fixed cost in nature, yeah, you want to make sure that those costs that you incur are still providing value to your business. This is an old New Yorker cartoon I was able to find about having management accountants and even MBAs being hired, and then they sit in some kind of nice air-conditioned office, and they're not really walking around, you know, in an oil refinery situation, putting on a hard hat, construction business, and talking to people who are really handling things and really doing things to understand what the real day-to-day problems are. I think only in this way can one get one's arms around the business and be able to find the most effective financial expression of that business. The shareholders will be happy, stakeholders, lenders, they'll be happy if you are able to describe your business in the most effective way. Okay, so those are kind of key areas that I wanted to touch on. I'll come back to summarizing some of this in just a few minutes. Please bear with me. I just wanted to turn back to Jamie Dimon. We haven't left him yet. This is a slide that I had in one of my treasury and banking courses. And because, of course, people are always going to talk about, well, what about blockchain? What about Bitcoin? If we're talking about, you know, technology and so on. Of course, blockchain has nothing to do with the pandemic, yeah, but there may be kind of an indirect connection between the two because technology, as I said, marches on and on. But let me talk about Bitcoin for a moment, or cryptocurrencies. This is Jamie Dimon in 4 years ago, 2017. Imagine, he actually said in an interview that he'd fire any employee who was trading Bitcoin, actually calling them, you know, stupid. And he actually said at the time that he thinks this whole crypto business at the time, he said, won't end well. He thought it was just kind of like a bubble. He even used the word fraud. He thought it was going to blow up. And maybe he was being very cautious because, you know, the 2008 financial crisis was not too far behind. And therefore, you know, we know that people do crazy and speculative things. And therefore, you know, maybe he was being on the cautious side. Well, what's happened since 2017? Well, you know that this year we've had Elon Musk at Tesla putting some of the excess cash reserves of the company into Bitcoin, very speculative way. It made the headlines. Of course, I'm sure some people who will do immediately what Elon Musk did, they'll copy him. If he jumps out a window, they will jump out of a window because they have full faith in him. Other people will stop and think about it and say, does this make sense for our business? I figured I was going to get a Bitcoin question today anyway. I happen to be in Switzerland, one of the centers of banking, but of course I know also Dubai is aware of the Bitcoin developments. So let's fast forward for, let's say, 4 years now. This is what Jamie Dimon said just recently. JP Morgan Chase will reportedly offer a Bitcoin fund for wealthy clients. Aha! So they've come around. And I've heard the same thing from other banks, big Swiss banks and so on. Jamie Dimon, I'm not a Bitcoin supporter. Okay, so he's still got his attitude personally from 2017. He doesn't care about it, no interest in Bitcoin. So there he's consistent. But he says, if clients are interested, I won't tell them what to do. In other words, he's thinking as a businessman here. He's saying that if you, the client, want to put your money into Bitcoin, fine, we will help you by providing the platforms that allow you to do it, but we're not going to go near it ourselves. In a sense, I think there's complete consistency between Jamie Dimon's attitude 4 years ago and today. In other words, what he's saying, it's not for him or his bank to take, say, an own position in cryptocurrency, but they're not going to stand in the way of customers who want to do it, because if a customer wants to throw his money away gambling, that's customer's choice. But it is a very interesting development that we have to take note of, because it means that if enough people are convinced that Bitcoin is something worthwhile to invest in, and there's always going to be, you know, sort of a 2% of a portfolio called alternative investments, the most speculative kind of investments. If you lose it completely, it won't hurt your portfolio. If it wins big, that's nice to have. It's a little bit of extra income on the portfolio. But you can see that the banks, in fact, are going to be, in fact, facilitating trading and other sorts of investments in Bitcoin on behalf of their customers, because they want to get they want to generate some income from the business indirectly. In fact, we also hear about startups where people are investing into Bitcoin trading platforms. In other words, they're investing into a business that provides a platform for trading. They're not actually buying the Bitcoin itself. So if the Bitcoin drops in value, they're not affected by it. What they're doing is they're buying shares in a company which is providing Bitcoin types of services. As you see the distinction there, the difference, they're kind of one step away from actual Bitcoin investments, but they understand that the Bitcoin sector has enough momentum in it for various types of startup businesses and trading businesses and so on to engage in that, or at least to make it available for customers to engage in it. And of course, we'll see that with organized exchanges and so on. We'll be making Bitcoin facilities available as well. So I think in that sense, cryptocurrencies are here to stay. I probably agree that, you know, there's no stopping that, even though I personally, would I put money into it? That's of no relevance. I get that question as well in class or over lunch normally, but that my answer is really of no relevance to other people. Anyway, so that's just a quick insight about financial innovation and what's going on. Obviously, banks are also you know, struggling with the same issues with regard to the pandemic in terms of how to assess what's important to customers, to be able to offer relevant products and services to customers, and to keep customers engaged and things like that. So the digital revolution, artificial intelligence applications to assessing customers and customer experience, I think that's very relevant for banks as well. Okay, let's just broaden the discussion now and start to wrap up. So my question to you in the final moments today, this is something I'd ask you to rate yourself on. Have you spent your pandemic wisely? Because now that people are being vaccinated, they might say, oh, thank God, now I can go back to the way things were before. I can forget about the pandemic, pretend it never happened. It was just a bad experience, and we'll just carry on our business as we did before. And I think that it would be a shame if we didn't make use of you know, something like the pandemic to at least do things in a different way, not to fall back into our old habits. So in a way, this is a challenge to you. I ask myself this at home as well. You know, what is different about your business and your business model going forward? In other words, what changes did you make are going to be permanent because they serve you going forward, and what were temporary and will fall away now that the pandemic is hopefully starting to wind down? What's changed for you? What hasn't? And most importantly, what kind of projects did you put off in the past because you never really had time? You were firefighting day to day, and now during the pandemic, perhaps things may have slowed down a little bit, where you maybe thought about longer term projects, and were you able to accomplish them? And if you haven't, maybe now is the time in the remaining months before we go back to kind of a new normal, really push on the project side, reviewing procedures and policies, you know, the things that you never really have time to get to, because managers don't have fixed job descriptions. They're very kind of woolly. It's kind of like, you know, you never really know what your day is going to be like, because people come to you with very unusual requests and problems, and you may find yourself firefighting. Using, you know, technology for internal processes, document handling, for example, archiving, IT systems, you know, that's a whole area, of course, which is, you know, kind of beyond my expertise. But as a manager, I have to be interested to know, you know, what is the benefit of a proposed change in the IT? What will it cost? What's the payback? You know, I will, you know, take people through net present value exercises and investment appraisal to see whether something makes sense to do or not. And the KPIs that are linked to that kind of a performance assessment. So IT systems, you know, cybersecurity, risk management systems, what kind of issues arose during the past year, being an unusual year, that gave rise to issues you'd never encountered before. In other words, fraud prevention, for example. Things are always evolving, and this is a good time now for you to look seriously at, what did you accomplish this past year? What did you postpone? What did you do finally that you couldn't do before? Make things different for yourself. Make it sound like it's a kind of a new beginning, a new, better beginning. And of course, here is the key thing from the standpoint of the programs we offer. We know that the CFO is involved in dealing with socio-cultural issues. This comes back to the cultural story I mentioned. I talked about corporate culture as being, internal. These are cultural issues that are more global now, outside the company. Understanding markets, demographics, competition, and so on. The world has changed, of course, in many ways. And we are all struggling to understand how the world has changed permanently and what sort of, back to new normal will the new world look like. So these are strategic inputs. If you have strategic planning in process, we have the models in our programs about assessing what's going on in the world, how that impacts your business. The reason why we like to focus in on this, even when we do purely financial courses, the CFO obviously reports to the CEO, along with other people. But the CFO has a small advantage because finance is integrative. In other words, all of the activities in the company kind of find financial expression. Oftentimes there's, from a budgeting point of view, there's an approval process. There are funding issues with regard to new projects. So CFO is very much at the center of things, very close to the CEO. And so even in terms of company succession, our philosophy at LEORON is that we like to think the CFO training should aim at achieving a CEO level. That's crucial because like the traditional Prussian army, every officer level was trained to be able to fulfill the responsibilities of the next level up. So a captain could do the major's job, a major could do a colonel's job, and the colonel's job could do the brigadier's job. That's how they organized it so that in action, if somebody gets hit or taken out of action, people at a lower level can jump into the next level up and drive forward the process without this continuity. And so this is why we very much like to approach our programs to take, financial directors and lift them to deal with strategic or with issues that are maybe, above their immediate direct responsibility. Which is why finally, in terms of LEORON training, it's another way of saying that we really take a holistic approach to things together with colleagues in the finance area, management accounting, Mike Turner, for example. We do the CFMP program, the CFO, the Master Financial Controller. I do treasury and banking types of courses. Mike covers IFRS. So we're there for you. And you, of course, are, of course, in touch with my colleagues in the marketing and sales area to be able to show you what sort of things we have on offer. God willing, I think by later this year, maybe the third quarter, I will be able to get on an airplane back to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, to Riyadh, and be able to continue with a classroom type of training. So that's where I kind of wanted to leave things. I hope that was maybe, hopefully in some ways helpful to you. I'm going to ask Ivana to jump in. I think we had results from the survey. If maybe you could maybe summarize for us if you had a chance to look.
Here we are. So state your preferences. Work from home, we have 33%, and work from the office, we have 67%.
Oh, interesting. You see how it's tipped over? I'm not surprised by that. And I think for various reasons, people are have their reasons for wanting to continue to have office kind of experience. Are you surprised? Is anybody surprised by that? Let's open up any microphones and see how we can get some feedback, please. Ivana, do you want to pick anybody in particular, just at random, or do we have any hands up through the?
Okay, anyone who wants to join in conversation can maybe raise hands or unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Anyone who raises hand, I will unmute and can step in conversation. I do see a question mark from Hadia Nauman.
Okay.
Hadia?
Hi, nice to be a part of this webinar, and it was very informative. Thank you so much for your insights. I really love the part about your comments on work from home and work from office, and the technological advancements and technological opportunities this pandemic has offered. So really useful information for all of us. Really thank you, and looking forward to be a participant in further webinars. Thank you.
Great. Me too.
Thank you, Hadia. I can see maybe Mona Bamani has raised a question mark here. I will try to unmute, and if interested can make a comment on the poll that we run when with the percentage offered. The percentage is 33% work from home and 67% work from the office.
Really interesting result. Any other comments or questions?
By pressing on the microphone, it will be easy to unmute yourself. If you have issues to unmute, okay, we can use the chat box maybe to get to the questions and to Mark.
Yeah, it's possible maybe somebody is having trouble with the microphone connection, so they can type in the comment or the question. Hello?
Eunice, I can see that you have raised hand. I'll try to unmute you, and you can probably also give a try to unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for the insightful message and session. Actually, I lead the finance team in Najm, and I think many participants from my team are joining, and I'm very happy they're listening. The previous participants, actually my team, and I'm very happy that people are seeing the advantage of this. And honestly, you know, listening to the conversation and how the cultural change happened, while I am driving on a road trip from one city to another, it rang a lot of bells that we are now having a live training while I'm driving in a road trip. So that's one of the cultural changes we have. At the same time, able to collaborate with the team remotely. That is something maybe in previous years was kind of impossible. Closing the books on a monthly basis without having the team around was maybe a dream. Now it's becoming reality, and it's getting us into the ground where we think about the connectivity, how we can stay and have a real trust and the teamwork together. And that's what pays a lot of, let's say, quality at this stage. Previously, we used to monitor every single step happening, but now we are empowering the team, we're trusting each other, building the calibers. And I think that is the change of the complete, let's say, post COVID-19 or any similar situation that we might face in the future. So it has been a great learning for all of us, but I think it gave us the chance to really stand up and think where we are and how we can improve. And as you said, procedures, processes, policies. This has been a very extensive exercise we have done during the lockdown time. So I believe that is a big change happening, and I'm very happy. I'm very proud of my team for getting all of us from where we were and where we are now.
So you've used the time very well, obviously, and that's good news. In fact, I would say that probably you won't see as much business travel as before, because people will have found that sometimes they take too many trips to visit an office where you know, a Zoom call would do the job, or very good, effective reports movements, and therefore it makes a lot of business trips perhaps superfluous or unnecessary. So I think that's maybe a permanent change that we're seeing as well. So that's very, very important comments you make, and thank you for making them.
It's a pleasure, and one of the advantages we have, it's not only us changing, the market is changing, government is changing, clients are changing, so everybody have some kind of common expectations, which is a very good, a unique opportunity. If we are not taking that opportunity, we are missing a big thing. So I'm very happy with the move we have now.
Totally, yeah, that's cool. So you're very you're fitter for the change, for the future changes, which will come in various unexpected ways. So it's building flexibility into your organization, basically, and I think that's trust you mentioned. I should have put the word trust on the slides. That's intrinsic to a corporate culture that works. The trust and the flexibility, and I think you're totally right in that. That's a good outcome. So thank you for your observations.
That's a very positive approach that I see. Thank you, Yunus. Do we have anyone else with a question? I see a question mark with Rachel Paramawi. Rasha, I'll try to unmute you, and maybe you can unmute yourself also to step in with a question. Important thing to mention is that after completing this webinar, the platform itself will automate the certificate of attendance. So basically tomorrow, I assume you should receive an email from the platform, go to webinar, which will issue your certificate. So it will be like presented a button where you can access your certificate and you can download it. Well, if there are no questions, maybe we can close this session where we are now, and we'll keep in touch. We'll have my contact details in the chat box. I will share them. You can connect to me or to the Financial Academy, and of course to LEORON training programs, where you can follow further and see how you can develop your knowledge to the topics of Certified Financial Management, CFO Masterclass, Master Financial Controller, Treasury, and IFRS with Marc Cannizzo. Thank you, everyone, today for the participation. Marc, thank you so much for the great topic shared here, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you, Ivana. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for your backup here, Ivana. Well done.
Most welcome. Thank you, Marc. Bye-bye.